caterhamracer.com 420R Championship is sponsored by Just Add Lightness, high-performance LED lights for the Caterham 7. And by Display and Design Display Structures, immerse yourself in worlds beyond with bespoke projection screens. And by Avon Tyres, on-road, on-track, on Avons. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to more esports action, Caterham style, for the caterhamracer.com 420R Championship. We've had a couple of weeks break, but we are back once again as we make the march towards Thruxton, the next venue on the real-life Caterham Motorsport calendar. And of course, is the turn of the top level of the Caterham Motorsport ladder, the 420R machines, to strut their stuff. Scott Woodwiss and Chris Hutchinson here once again on commentary. Before we do get into the action in qualifying at the moment, we've got about 11 minutes to go. We should also make a mention that for those who'll be following Caterham Motorsport will know that there was some racing going on at Cadwell Park we were leading up to. And of course we had all 5 championships down to enforce. We had Academy, Road Sport, 270R, 310R, and the newly renamed and national level awarded Caterham 7 UK Championship as they go on their quest to find the first ever British Caterham champion. But the graphic you're seeing here just details how many of our regular caterhamracer.com competitors were competing, and not only that, how successful they were, because out of all the cars that you see on the screen, we managed to see a combined 8 wins, 8 seconds, a third and 8 fastest laps. It just shows not only how competitive the caterhamracer.com world is, but also how many drivers from the real world were using it to sharpen their skills and use it to full advantage on the twists and turns at Cadwell Park. It's a very different circuit here, Chris, moving into it. But first of all, we should mention it was a great first weekend for everyone involved in Caterham Motorsport. I was there in person to watch it happen. Mostly sunny, apart from the fact we had some rain in the first Road Sport and 270R race, but as a whole I think it just shows that everyone that was practicing not just in the lockdown series but also in the esports series up until now have been certainly using it to full effect, because those results certainly speak for themselves, both in their real world ability and also in their esports ability.
Yeah, I wasn't able to actually attend this one, but I was following along very closely on TSL timing, and since then all the races have been put up on YouTube, so you can go and watch those by searching for the Caterham races on YouTube. And it was just brilliant to see our drivers doing so well and really bringing it home. Like you say, that one shower in that one race just really it made it exciting for everyone, didn't it? But for everyone else, it was an extremely hot and sunny weekend, and by all accounts, from what I've heard, everyone had a great time.
Yeah, it was absolutely great. We also got to see some action from the other side of the Caterham paddock in the Caterham Graduates on Sunday, so good to see all them out. There's a few drivers that compete with us here in the caterhamracer.com series that also are regulars in Caterham Graduates. I'm thinking of like to Harry Senior and Jamie Elwood amongst others, so good to see them in the mix as well. Whilst qualifying's going on, we've got currently just under 9 minutes to go with Steve McMaster, championship leader, ahead of the points. Speaking of the points, we may as well give a quick glance over to how the standings sit coming into our third weekend of the season for the 420Rs, and it is Steve McMaster who leads the way with 136 points, from Jaroslav Cherny from the Czech Republic on 134, and then it's a 7-point gap back to the next battle going on between Christian Zaruta in third and Belgium's Emil Jaselinks in the 4th position. But then we've got a very tight 6-way fight developing for 5th in the standings in the second half of the top 10. Tom Willis currently sits on 108 in 5th position, a point ahead of Tim Van Hee, a further point ahead of Paul Fernerhuff, a further point ahead of both James Murphy and David Rowe, and then 2 further points ahead of James Fowler in 10th position. And as you can see, 36 drivers have raced in the series so far. It just shows how popular it is, but also how competitive it gets on those B grids, because we do get some drivers who, particularly at Cadwell Park, we expected to try and be up there in the A grid, but for whatever reason just couldn't put the lap together to get themselves up into the top group.
Yeah, if you let you let anything slide or can't make an event, yep, it's competitive enough that you just slide down the order. So yeah, and it's quite. It amazes me every week that we get the sort of people readjusting themselves. Some people suit other tracks, and that really does make a difference to where you qualify. Quite often the top people are still around the top, but in the midfield particularly, around that kind of cut-off where we decide the A grid or B grid, it's often exciting to see who is in the mix for this week. And we've definitely got some people that have been on the B grid sort of making their way up onto the A grid.
One person we should give a shout out to, you might not thank us for it, is Matt Shepherd, who is currently sat at the moment in 11th fastest. He was the last qualifier out of the 18, but the way he did it was rather amusing. We were talking about this before the stream, in that he set his lap last night, but it was after he'd taken a bit of a spirited trip to the pub, so he managed to get back onto the server and set a quick enough time to get himself on the grid. So If that's what he's like after a couple of G&Ts, Chris, I wonder what he's like when he's fully sober.
Well, he's currently sitting at 11th, so actually 7 places higher than he was in pre-qualifying. So, yeah, I think you can say that we certainly don't recommend that in real life, but actually, it's one of the benefits of the simulator, isn't it? You can go out and have a bit of fun and then still get back and have a drive.
Yeah, and set a decent enough lap time to get yourself in the A grid, so who knew? But yeah, for the record, we definitely don't condone drinking, driving whatsoever, particularly when you're racing a Caterham on a race weekend, so don't do that, of course, obviously. That's nothing we condone of the sort. Let's look at what's happening in the qualifying sessions so far, and it is points leader Steve McMaster, typically in many cases, who is currently sat at the top of the times. Popping into second place, it looks like it's just gone James Murphy, with a better time that puts him less than 2/10 away from the fastest time. David Rowe, who we're looking at here, of DPR Motorsport, who was busy last weekend in the sunshine running his phalanx of Caterhams at Cadwell Park. He's now getting behind the virtual wheel once again in third fastest. Jaroslav Cherny fourth ahead of James Wingfield, who was also out in action in his sort of bright sort of chrome, reddish, pink and yellow Caterham in the 310Rs. Fifth quickest from Christian Zaruta, then Emil Gisellings, Paul Fernerhuff, Steve Arnell and Tom Willis. There is Christian Zaruta, and what I always like to dub the Brawn GP Special, because well, if you look at the colour scheme, it's very reminiscent to that which Jenson Button ran on his F1 car to win the 2009 Formula 1 World Championship, and it certainly is giving quite a bit of pace in P6 at the moment. We should have mentioned there is one new driver that's popping up into Grid A for the first time tonight, and that is, if I can find him on my sheet of people going back onto the first page, Mark Rodman, who is in the screen here, currently sat in 16th. He's the owner of the caterham7diaries.com website, and it's always nice to see a new face on the grid, at least in Grid A, and so hopefully he might be able to learn a few things. But of course, as in any case with Caterham racing, esports or real, he's going to have to learn it pretty quickly and possibly the hard way.
Also good to see on his blog that he's recently installed the Just Add Lightness LED lights on his Caterham, so why not head there and go and have a read up on what he thinks around the new LED lights, and certainly supporting our series sponsor, which is great to see.
Very slick transition, I like that, Chris, well done. Yeah, of course, thanks to our sponsors, you mentioned Just Add Lightness, Avon Tyres and D&D Bespoke displays. Whilst we were talking about that, a new provisional pole sitter, David Rowe, has gone fastest, 125.818. He's only 15 thousandths quicker than Steve McMaster in second place. Christian Zaruta has also made a noticeable improvement, as he's now gone up to third fastest, ahead of James Murphy. So now the top four is covered by less than 0.2 of a second with 4 minutes to go. And we were talking about the kind of circuit this is, Chris. Of course, you've driven here before in the past, in 2018, back in the 310R days on your route to the championship. And of course, we've seen Caterham racing here before in the lockdown series in season 1. But this is a circuit that is not just the fastest circuit in the country now, thanks to the sad demise of Rockian, but it's also a circuit that's quite unique, in which it very much relies on how much speed you can carry through the corners, but also how much momentum and precision you've got underneath you, because you've only really got to brake twice, which is once into Campbell Cobb and Seagrave, and the second time down towards the club chicane, which Steve McMaster's coming up to now. But from all of that point, it's very much about throttle management and how well you can keep the car balanced, particularly through those high-speed corners. Yeah,
to get a lap time round here, you actually need a toe in real life, and even on the sim it does help by maybe a couple of tenths. But yeah, it's all about momentum. So it's a very different track from something like Cadwell, where we've been already, and even Alton Park, where we started. It's much more about that momentum. So they're having to deal with a bit of understeer tonight. The cars want to plough on, and the other thing is, because it's so wide and flowing, actually as soon as you go side by side, it does affect your lap speed quite significantly. The actual track itself is pretty wide. But you find that as soon as you go side by side with someone, it really holds things up, and then everyone bunches up behind that. So sometimes you'll see someone escaping away because of that bunching, but quite often, more often than not, you see a big pile of Caterhams all join a big party.
The great thing is we get quite a party down towards particularly the club chicane, when everyone tries to go four abreast into an area which you can only really go single file, which is always entertaining, which is always said rather nervously, particularly on commentary or anyone that's from the cockpit. Tom Willis, who was one of last year's Caterham Academy champions, we're riding on board with him next in Church, arguably the scariest, the most daunting corner, not just on the circuit, but in possibly UK motorsport now. Has been for years. He's currently sat in 7th fastest, and he's only half a second off the pole time, which we've now got just over 2 minutes to go. In fact, 2 minutes on the dot as we flick through the club chicane and onto the pit straight. And Tom's now got to try and get a little bit quicker than a 125.8, but he's not quite on the pace on that lap as he comes across. He's off by 1.7 seconds on that lap, so he's only really got one more attempt to go, if not maybe two, if he's quick enough to get around. doesn't back off too much. Here's Jaroslav Cherny, our Czech driver, one of our 2 people who we're very thankful for originally putting these cars together. He and Ben Obro, who have been working on these cars originally, and of course all the feedback that's come through from all the caterhamracer.com drivers that we've had over in season 1 and through the course of season 2 so far as well, is helping Jaroslav and Ben to be able to make these cars much better in terms of how they feel, how they drive, make them even more realistic to the real world cars. And he has got a second place to defend in the points tonight. He's got to try and close that gap down to Steve McMaster, which is only 2 points, to try and beat him. But on a circuit like this, of course, we talk about momentum and consistency and being able to get a tow. It's pretty. What I found interesting in terms of looking at the points, to quickly jump to that point as well, is that it's the drivers that have been the most consistent in the top 4 where you've got the biggest sort of gaps. And then the drivers that have had mixed fortunes from 5th down to 10th is where it's most closest and where the results have been a bit more, slightly more random, which is why you've got 6 drivers covered by 5 points in the bottom half of the top 10. So it's consistency pays if you want to be able to keep a nice gap at the top of the field, but if you find yourself going back and forth from the top 10 and up and down the order, it can really close things up and give the opportunity for other drivers around you in the points to take advantage of that and maybe steal a couple of spots, results depending.
Yeah, absolutely. Consistency is king, especially as we've got two scores that they can drop. So by the time we get to the end of the season, it'll all close up even more where they drop out one of their rounds that maybe they've been less consistent at or haven't been able to attend. We just seen Steve McMaster there take pole position back from David Rowe. So great lap in the dying seconds. We've got 3 seconds left of the actual time, but some of these people will be able to complete their lap. So this is definitely their last gasp attempts now.
So it felt as though my eyes were playing tricks on me. A small improvement also from James Murphy, or considerable one, in fact, that he was now within a few hundredths of a second of David Rowe's time, which means he was currently sat at that point in 3rd position. But as we say, you're absolutely correct. Steve McMaster has gone to provisional pole by quite a margin, by almost a quarter of a second, which is pretty big on a circuit like this, as we see David Rowe trying to line up another lap. But looking at the timer, he's got sort of 5 minutes on that timer, so I'm not quite sure that's going to be anywhere near a time that will get him on the front row of the grid. So he's going to hold on. James Murphy, that's not quite keeping to track limits, is it, James? I think he realises that because he starts to pull off the road. We always like to use the word over-enthusiastic when it comes to James Murphy, and Superman himself certainly exploring the limits of the track and more in many cases, but I think you'll find you need to keep it on the grey stuff, not the green, so otherwise you might get a slap on the wrist with a time penalty or at least a warning for track limits. Across the line goes Tom Willis and can't improve his time from 7th, but he still remains on the 4th row of the grid alongside Emil Jaseling. And then Paul Fernerhuff and Steve Arnell round out the top 10. So, the grid order then, as it stands for the first of 2 15-minute races tonight at Thruxton in the 420R Championship, is thus: Steve McMaster, points leader, on pole by just over a quarter of a second from David Rowe alongside him on the front row. Then James Murphy and Christian Zaruta from Jaroslav Cherny and James Wingfield. Then it's Tom Willis and Emil Jaseling, Paul Fernerhuff and Steve Arnell round out the top 10. Outside it, Matt Shepherd manages to go 11th alongside Chris Skillicorn, who's had a brilliant start to his academy season, actually winning at Cadwell, so congratulations to him for that victory. Tim Van, he starts from the 7th row of the grid alongside Blair McConaughey, bit off the pace for Blair, but he normally races quite well through the field. Paul Hawker and Mark Rodman making his first appearance in Grid A, starting from 16th on the grid, and then it's Andrew Parker and Tom McEwing on the 9th row of the grid to round out the 18 cars in Grid A. There is also a Grid B race going on as well, so best of luck to everyone competing in that. It'd be easy at this point to say let's predict a possible result, but given that again McMaster has shown his pace at least over a single lap, and he's normally pretty good to maintain that over the course of a race, but that just front few, the first 5 or 6 cars, they're usually quite close normally, but just here at Thruxton there just seem to be that little bit closer, and I anticipate it's going to reflect in how close that pack runs in the race until somebody inevitably makes a mistake and runs wide or gets a big sideways twitch on and loses a bit of momentum. So is it going to be as close as we possibly anticipate it's going to be, or do you think that someone like McMaster is going to take the jump from pole position and run away with it?
Look, I would. I just want it to remain close throughout. You know, I'm always for the race. But yeah, you're right. We do see McMaster regularly sort of teach everyone a lesson around consistency. That's great to see. Let's just get everyone on the screen. I predict that we are going to see a bunch race, and I really hope we do. But it's easy to predict, and it's hard to actually get that right and be a proper punter. But also, I think, some of these Journey is not quite on the front of the grid where you'd normally expect him to see, and he's often quite aggressive when he's slightly lower down the order. So and he's next to sort of Christian Scheruter, who's also known for that kind of aggression when he's not quite at the front of the field. So that's going to be an interesting clash point, and with Wingfield in between, I think that's an interesting recipe, and maybe that gives David Rowe and Steve McMaster and James de Murphy the opportunity to move away.
One thing with Jaroslav Černý is that usually if he is further back in the field, he's very good at moving forwards to get himself into a position where he can take full advantage of starting higher up the grid for race 2. And usually in that situation, Chris, he tends to take full advantage and take the lead. And usually when he gets into a lead in a race, he's not easy to catch up with. At least the drivers like McMaster can keep pace with him, as we saw before, I think, in the academy at Cabwell. But in terms of actually overhauling him, he's someone who's very difficult to try and catch. And even when you do catch him, he does make that a very wide Caterham indeed. You
can't afford to let him go, can you? So him and McMaster have both sort of proven that over the time. Once the gap is there, it's really difficult to put it back. But around here, again, like I said, if you've got two people fighting side by side, quite often see it. Here come the lights.
So McMaster on pole on the left, David Rowe on the right in second place. Who is going to take the first spoils of victory tonight in the first 15 minutes of the 420R Championship at Thruxton. Red lights are up, revs are up. Let's see who gets the best start from the front row of the grid. We're racing. Looks like a pretty clean start for the first few rows. No one getting sideways on the run towards Allard for the first time. So let's see if we can see who gets in front. It's going to be side by side for the lead already, and Rowe has got himself in front. He has his nose by a couple of car lengths, and he's got the lead on the run towards the complex at Campbell, Cobb and Seagrave. Hold your breath, everybody. This could be quite tense. The top 5 are turning into Campbell and then into Cobb as Černý tries to defend from Scheruter. Scheruter sends one up the inside for 4th place through Cobb, but he'll be on the outside line for Seagrave as there's a bit of more contact as Černý gets his elbows out and just shoves Christian out of the way. That now gives an opportunity for both James Wingfield and Tom Willis to get involved. Emil Jasenic seems to have hit some strife in that opening few corners. He's already down to 16th position after he was starting around the top 10, and on the grass that's James Murphy. He was using it in qualifying. It seems to have worked in the race so far, as he's now managed to get himself into the lead. But he's now got his DPR team boss to his outside as they run towards Church Corner. And already, Chris, it's 3 abreast on the run towards Church. But Master goes up the inside of the pair of the DPR cars into the lead through the daunting right-hander. We've already got a breakaway pack of what looks to be 7 cars. And even in between them, it's to the top 3 trying to get away with McMaster, Murphy and Rowe all together. And they're going to go 3 abreast again, Chris, on the run down towards Club Chicane. This is only the first lap.
Surely they can't make this stick. I call this clump racing at the moment. See David Rowe just locking up a little wheel there. Makes it through though. McMaster getting in the inside line for the second part of the chicane. But there go. Christian's got a nice run, but he's got nowhere to use it. It's classic Thruxton at the moment. Let's hope they can keep this up for the whole 15 minutes.
I suspect this could be the theme for the race, not the first one, but the second one too, as Scheruter disposes Rowe of 3rd position through Allard Corner. It's also side by side behind between Tom Willis and James Wingfield over 7th position as they head into Campbell, Cobb and Seagrave for the second time at proper racing speeds. So there is Christian Scheruter already onto the back, and intriguingly it's now McMaster in the lead, and it's now a DPR 2-3-4 because you've got Murphy, then Scheruter, then Rowe. Jaroslav Černý, who is staying in the mix, is going for 4th place, possibly on the outside into the left-hander as they turn it up through the complex, and he goes into Noble Corner towards Goodwood, so he might possibly have a chance to make a move here as they come up through the long, almost never-ending right-hander of Goodwood, which then translates into the little kink of Village and the short straight towards Church. This is Village. And McMaster trying to escape. He's only got half a second. And we've talked about it before. Being inside that half a second range in these Caterhams in the sim here in Assetto Corsa, that's the magic range that you want to be in. If you're inside the half a second, that's when you start to get the effect of the toe. We've said it before that these Caterhams are rather unaerodynamic. They've got the aerodynamic properties of a cow, I think, but that makes it for great racing in terms of how close they can get and the slipstream effect that they can have. Černy's gone for 4th down towards Club Chicane on the slipstream, and Rowe thinks, I'm not having that, I'm going to go down the outside. Bit over-enthusiastic under brakes and loses out and remains in 5th position. It loses now 5th to 6th as he has, because Wingfield's also gone through. Rowe gets him back on the exit, and into the pit lane has gone James Wingfield. Now, I suspect, Chris, even something happened with David Rowe, because I'm not quite sure what James Wingfield intended to pit after that.
Sometimes you can get bounced into the pit lane here, out at the sort of end of if you get the rear end lively. So maybe that's what happened to either that, or he got a jump start and he's having to actually go through the pits to alleviate that penalty. Just watch that gap from McMaster, though. It's just starting to creep up, and also there's a gap between Murphy and Sharuta. Sharuta doing a great job managing off the start, moving briefly up to second, and now looks like he's settled into third. But Cherney's obviously coming fast. He's come across that gap from David Rowe and is looking menacing. But yeah, that gap to McMaster was looking a little bit threatening, but I think James Murphy might have it under control now.
Whilst we were talking about that, Mark Rodman's in the pit lane for either a penalty or reasons we're not sure, and we've also sadly lost Chris Skillicorn. He's out of the race, so Chris not taking any part in race 1 further, but he might be on the back of grid for race 2. Here's Paul Fernerhuff. He's one of our sort of sim racing drivers amongst the plethora of Caterham drivers in the mix here. He's having a good battle so far with Steve Arnell, who himself has had a good start. He's managed to get through the melee and come from the 5th row of the grid up to 6th position. It might be 7th though, because Fernerhuff has got a good toe up the hill towards the club chicane and under brakes. Arnell, I think, just feeling that discretion's the better part of valour and just letting Fernerhuff glide through on the inside line to pick up 6th place. So at the end of lap 2, that's now going to be McMaster in front, but looking at the lap time, McMurphy was just quicker. But despite that, the gap has gone to 3/4 of a second. Here's James Wingfield, who was in that top 6 or 7 group. He's dropped back to 9th. He's got quite an unruly mob behind him battling in a position as Tom Willis and Blair McConaughey reignite their battles from the academy last year as they're going side by side for the final top 10 place. We've also got Tom McEwing and Emma Jaselenk in there too, and also it looks like we've got Andrew Parker as well, so they're all getting in there. Tim Vanhe's also trying to get in the mix. Mark Rodman's still in pit lane, sadly, for some reason, as we come out of Campbell Cobb and Seagrave. And Wingfield, I think, has got enough pace to possibly get away from this group, Chris, but it all depends on if the cars behind start to keep on working together, because if they can start to use the toe between each other to close up with James, it might be a case where James might inadvertently start bringing the cars behind him with him as he moves forward. We've seen that in real Caterham racing, and it can happen in the sim as well, provided the cars behind actually do start working together and not fighting amongst themselves.
And it didn't look like that was going to happen, did it, Scott? We see Christian there running outside of Church Corner, sorry. And it didn't look like they were going to. It was amazing, again, the sort of depth of the racing going down. Even these lead pairs have actually sort of spread themselves out a little bit, but the fighting is still as fierce as ever in the mid-pack.
Looks like that Saruta might be starting to come under threat now from Jaroslav Cherney. The gap is, I can see it's under half a second, so I think Cherney now might have an opportunity here to make a move. We go on board with the Czech driver as he turns his way through the fast right-hander of Allard. And he goes up through the left-hander, which doesn't have a name, but it's on the run towards the Campbell Cobb Seagrave complex. And here's a chance for Cherney to maybe make a dive down the outside if he's got enough grip and enough confidence to make it stick. But just on the power there, Saruta's got the line held on and gives him a little bump to encourage him through the middle of the complex. Come on, Christian, get your foot down, because you've got to try and catch the top 2. Well, the gap is still 3/4 of a second, but you have to say, Chris, that McMaster's, even though he is in front and has got that sort of over half a second gap here to negate the toe, he's not getting away at the moment, and Murphy seems to have at least a measure of his pace with a little bit of a toe here, if not in clear air. So lap time wise, they seem pretty equally matched. It just needs Murphy to reduce that gap back down to half a second, find a couple of tenths more per lap, and maybe getting striking range of possibly making a move for the lead.
Yeah, and it's just one minor mistake is all it takes to wipe out all those laps, of effort to get it. As we see Cherney up the inside of Sharuta, it looked like through the early part of the lap he was managing that gap, just easing off the throttle to make sure he was in a good position. Christian went a bit defensive around the sort of chicanes, which is why there was a little bit of a nudge there, but it does look like Cherney's got it done, and we're just watching behind. Rowe's got everything back under control now, and looks like he's going to come and want to join in this fun as well.
He's got a second and a half to make up on these cars in front, and they might well do that if these two keep on battling the way they are. But at the same time, if they can start working together, they might have a chance to keep up with McMaster and Murphy. McMaster puts in a new fastest lap of the race to put the lead gap out to just over a second. It was a 1:26, I think it was, 26.2 if I read that correctly. So into Campbell Cobb and Seagrove come the leaders once again. McMaster with that lead gap now just got under a second, but it's hovering around about sort of within a range of a couple of tenths. It keeps on going up and down by. He has stretched the gap out by a further couple of tenths. Here's the next group behind the battle between Paul Fernhoff and Steve Arnell, although there's a bit of a gap between them and Matt Shepherd. Shepherd goes through the shot, but this next closest battle is Wingfield versus Willis, and Willis has managed to pull away from Blair McConaughey, who in turn is having to have a big scrap with Emil Jesselink, who's climbing back up the order, and his fellow Belgian Tim Van Heet. Tom McEwing's not too far away either, by about a second and a half. So lots of battles up and down the field, but this is one of the closest, as Wingfield having to possibly start to go defensive, as Willis is right underneath the roll cage of that 420R, turning their way through the right-hander at Goodwood, and now through the little kink of Village. And now Willis has got the momentum to set himself up for a move up the inside into Church. And I have a feeling that looks as though, yes, Wingfield has to capitulate and says, after you, Tom. But looks for the undercut on the exit, and it's a classic Church move where he's letting go on the exit of the corner to go through, but he sets himself up for a better run out of it, and it's 3 abreast behind. Look at this, because behind these two we've now got Jesselink, McConaughey and Van Heet going 3 and wide, and it's Jesselink that wins out on that one. You can hardly speak watching this battle, as that McConaughey defends from Van Heet, who looks for the undercut to switch back through the club chicane, and McConaughey launching himself off the exit of the club chicane onto the pit straight. He's got Van Heet to his outside, so sprint down the pit straight towards Allard Corner once again. We've only got just under 6 minutes to go here, so these guys really are scrapping amongst each other. But it's the classic thing to mention is that even if these guys keep on fighting each other, the 2 cars in front of Wingfield and Willis are just going to keep on running away, despite the fact that they're in their own battle as well.
Yeah. Do you attack or do you defend, or do you sit in line? Every single corner you've got to make that decision about what you think is best for your race overall. And obviously we see differences of opinion quite often with what is best. But like you say, the classic move around Church where Wingfield did have to give away to Willis on that position, but on the exit, because he had the better run through the corner, easily able to retake. Should say well done to Tom Willis for 2 dominant wins in road sport, even beating some 270 competitors in his races over the weekend at Cadwell Park. So good job to him.
Yeah, just proving that all that running in the academy certainly helped him out. What's not helping Christian Zaruta here is David Rowe slotting up the inside to make a move, although that would have been the case. But David Rowe gets little sideways in the brakes. He tries to get the car stopped into the second part of the club chicane. Now on the onboard shot, he's got arms all over the place. He tries to gather the car back up, and Christian Zaruta just slid back past, and he's now back into 4th position. So through Allard Corner they go. 4.5 minutes left on the timer still to run in this first race. Steve McMaster has the lead. There go the leaders into Campbell, Cobb and Seagrave, and the gap is going out bit by bit, lap by lap now. The gap is now 1.5, 1.6 seconds. McMaster's just outside of that range by about at least a second now, but Murphy can start to attack, and really it might be this point in the race where either Murphy's just sitting back and taking the points for second, Chris, or it might be the case that he tried to push early on but maybe overheated his tyres. Maybe he's having to sit back a little bit here and try and possibly looking back at that. We'll come back to that in a second, as we're seeing our 2 Belgian drivers going side to side through Campbell, Cobb and Seagrave, and just I think was passed by Van Heet for a second, but the car in the old school green and yellow Lotus colours is now going to sweep back around the outside into Noble. Through Goodwood he might have the advantage, but they're still going side by side, which I think puts 2 wheels onto the grass, as now Van Heet carries the momentum all the way through the long Goodwood corner, but Jesselink has got his foot down as he carries on. So these guys might not have raced this circuit in real life, Chris, but they're certainly taking to it pretty quickly, and the racecraft is brilliant.
We see these two racing quite often on the server. They seem to have sort of similar pace, and they absolutely love that racing and maintain it throughout the whole 15 minutes. Like I say it many times, it's such a difficult task to keep your concentration and everything going, but these two manage it, and they look like they have a ball of a time.
Really does. I think it's going to look back up the inside. They both hit the brakes as it is. I think lets Van Heet just outbrake him a little bit into the chicane. He will now sit back to try and get the toe. Whilst that was happening, the lead gap has now come down slightly, because it's come down to just under 1.5 seconds now, as Murphy did set a new personal best by a couple of tenths. He was quicker than McMaster on the last lap, so maybe he's been sitting back, maybe keeping his powder dry a little bit. But I just suspect possibly, Chris, that with the gap now at possibly 1.2, maybe down to 1.1 seconds, and the fact that McMaster's keeping very consistent, he might be a little wide there on the exit of Noble into Goodwood. But apart from that, I just suspect that if Murphy is making an attack, he's left it rather late at this point in the race. I would have thought maybe at least another lap prior to that, if he found his rhythm, and it might have been in with a shout. But I don't know, he's a bit too far back for me.
Yeah, I'd agree. He was hanging in the balance a lap ago, but it still only takes that one mistake, and the pressure of being out front can be quite extreme. But yeah, you're right. With maybe 2 laps to go, something like that, so the end of this one and another one, Yeah, I think that's close. These Paul Ferniehoff and Steve Arnell are just switching to now, and they have been having a race-long battle as well. I thought Paul had broken the toe of Steve, but it looks like they're back at it again now.
Yeah, plenty wherever you look, as now Ferniehoff is going to go up the inside of Arnell. You're absolutely right, they have been going back and forth for 6th position. Arnell has it, but now Ferniehoff decided he wants it more and just hops over the club chicane to pick up the top 6th place. Just whilst we're also watching that sequence of races in the last couple of laps, Paul Hawker has sadly retired from the race, and Chris Skithercorn has got back into pit lane, but he's not actually going back into the race, it looks though. So Paul Hawker's been our 3rd retirement, sadly, so he'll hopefully have some better fortunes in race 2. Now this is interesting. The gap, we said that the possible opportunity to take the race victory had gone for James Murphy. We might have to eat our words, Chris, because the gap has significantly come down by at least half a second now. It's now underneath 0.8 of a second, and maybe if Murphy is putting on this last-minute charge, maybe it's stronger than we thought.
I am more than happy to eat those words if we could get a last lap close up. And again, as the gap comes down, you know that Steve McMaster is looking in his mirrors, and that pressure only gets greater. And obviously the hunger from James. So if he can keep that under control, it still is, like you say, it's still open, still there. The dream is real.
James will be fired up after you got a couple of podiums in the, I think it was the 310R portion of the races that he had at Campbell Park. So he will certainly be on good form. They're going to go into the last lap of the race here. 3/4 of a second is the gap, but it all depends on how much ground maybe under brakes and through the club chicane that Murphy can make up as they hop their way right, left, and then right again. And he's lost a couple of tenths through the chicane, but whether the exit's good enough to pull it back those tenths that he's lost doesn't appear to be. Across the line, yeah, he was slower than 2 tenths on that lap as they come through Allard for the last time. So the gap is still under a second, it looks like. In fact, it's just gone over it, so I can eat my words on that one. But even so, it's hovering over just under a second, and so it really is going to require a mistake from Steve McMaster. But then again, he's not the championship leader for no just on luck, or luck. It's all on merit. The fact that he's been able to put in some very consistent results. This could be a change of position in the last lap here for 4th place. Christian Zaruta, who is trying to keep Jaroslav Cherny in his sights to possibly snatch a podium, is now finding himself under threat from his team boss David Rose. They come up through, or his ex-team boss, because Christian doesn't really race these days anymore, but he does race virtually. But when he was racing, he was a DPR driver. He didn't expect to get a tap from David Rose. He looks round the outside at nobody. Might have the inside for Goodwood though. He might possibly force the door open with a crowbar here as he goes up the inside through the right-hander at Goodwood. A little friendly tap there from Rowe on the inside. A little bit of wheel-to-wheel contact between himself and Christian. They're going to go side by side again now as Christian goes round the outside and says, I'll have that 4th place back, Dave, if you don't mind, thank you. Up through Church Corner for the final time. But back to the front as they come down towards it. We'll come back to that battle in a second. But Steve McMaster, as we said, he's not the championship leader for nothing. He comes into Club Chicane for the last time. Fingers crossed, can he make it through unscathed? He hops right, left, and then right again. He's all in the clear as he heads out of the final corner. He will make it his 3rd race victory of the season, up to the checkered flag. Steve McMaster wins the first race of the evening in the 420 yards here at Thruxton. 2nd for James Murphy, who pushed him all the way. Jaroslav Cherny does indeed improve in race 1 to start from 3rd for race 2 as he finishes in the mix. A close finish at the end, but it looks as though to me, well, it says that David Rowe finished behind Christian Zaruta, so I think we can definitely tell that David was in front of Christian at the line, so maybe there's a bit of a glitch there in the result. Paul Ferniehoff therefore picks up what should be 6th position, and it should be Steve Arnell from Matt Shepherd and James Wingfield. Glenn McConaughey comes next to round out the top 10 from Tim Vanhee. I'm not quite sure if David would possibly just cross the line and then escape back to the pits quickly. I'm not sure the reason, but either way, it looks as though it's counting him as being in the pit lane of 14th when he definitely crossed the line as far as I could see.
Yeah, I think we'll see a different result once we get back into the pit lane. We'll go and see that now. Yeah,
potentially. Let's see if it does switch across.
It doesn't actually, so that's interesting.
Maybe.
We'll have to maybe review those results afterwards.
Yeah, but I think visibly, if we look back on the broadcast, we can definitely see the fact that David Rowe was indeed in front of Christian Zaruta when he crossed the line. So whether it's a bit of a glitch in the Assessor Corsa system, we're not sure. But we're running on the basis that David was in fact 4th. So it is Steve McMaster who takes his 3rd win of the season from James Murphy in 2nd place, and Jaroslav Cherny, again, keeps on improving from a deep position deep in the field. He will start in 3rd, and he's definitely going to be one to watch in the early laps in race 2. It should then be David Rowe in 4th place. Christian Zaruta is 5th, so everyone moves down one space from what you can see on the screen. So it should be Paul Ferniehoff in 6th, Steve Arnell 7th, Matt Shepherd 8th, James Wingfield 9th, and Blair McConaughey rounding out the top 10 from Tim Vanhee in 11th, and it should be 12th for, if we flick over to the second screen, thank you, 12th position for Emil Jaselic, 13th for Tom Willis, 14th for Tom McEwing, 15th for Andrew Parker, and he was the last finisher in the race. And we sadly lost throughout that first encounter Paul Hawker, Mark Rodman, and Chris Skillicorn. So, second race coming up in a few minutes' time.
What's going to be interesting, Scott, is if we have had a server glitch, and this could be the most unfortunate server glitch for David Rowe, because the finishing positions that are recorded will be the starting positions for the following race. So are we going to see David Rowe having to start down in 14th? That's an unfortunate affair if that is the case.
It seems to be an unfortunate theme for most weekends when it comes to caterhamracer.com, where David Rowe, bless him, has got the pace to at least win a race and does a great job most of the time, but he always seems to come a cropper and stumble on something or have some kind of a stumbling block that he falls over, whether he makes contact with somebody or has a spin, or something happens to him in terms of a penalty. And I think we should sit there thinking, can I just win one race without any trouble and just get a decent result? But David Rowe, if that is the case, unfortunately will have to start from the 7th row of the grid, which is unfortunate because he definitely came across on the screen in terms of plain sight of everyone in 4th place, just ahead of Christian Zaruta. But if that is an issue for the server, then unfortunately it's slightly out of our hands in terms of how that happened. But Steve McMaster then likes to play a victory from pole, but it just depends now if James Murphy, now he starts on the front row again, momentarily was in the lead at the start of that race, but then once McMaster got in front, he had that gap that he was able to manage, and despite a small little period in the last couple of laps where he was reeled back in a little bit by James Murphy, he had enough left in the tank just to keep that gap at just over a second, keeping out of touching distance of being under attack from James. So the question's got to be, Chris, if he can do it again, or if James can get a better start this time and try and remain in front to possibly get himself his first win of the season, if he can take full advantage of a good start.
Yeah, can he do it? Yeah, he absolutely can do it, and now is the chance. I think though that Jesselink will be. Cherney will be the person looking to make that. He made good progress through that race and raced well, so he's probably looking to make the most up there. But I definitely think that any of those top 3, in fact the top 4, can make that, and it does indeed look like David Rowe is further down the grid. I'll have to make an apology to him on behalf of the server.
Oh, for a second he jumped off the grid because I saw there was an empty grid spot I can see from what should be 13th on the grid, but of course he should be 14th. So maybe he should. Oh, the cars reappear there. In fact, actually looking at it, he might even be 15th actually, because I think it looks as though for some reason there is definitely what looks to be the black and green car on the left-hand side of row 8, which suggests to me that he is starting possibly from 15 because that's where he was in the result. So might be a further place back. In fact, I think yes he is. I can see the black and green there. So a little bit further back than even we anticipated. So he's 15th, unfortunately.
He's wronged the server.
If anyone's going to be determined to get a good result, Chris, it's definitely going to be David. So one to watch from towards the rear of the pack.
Yeah, and he's capable of doing it as well. So let's add a little bit of spice in there, and let's see how he can do it. But certainly, I would say if I was the front 4 now, I would be pretty thankful for that.
Yeah, it's hard to relax, of course, because everyone in that top 4 is as hungry as ever. Right, here come the lights for the second race of the evening here at Thruxton. Same front row, McMaster on pole, Murphy alongside him. Can Murphy get the victory, or is it going to be win number 4 of the season, Steve McMaster? Let's find out as the red lights go out early second now. Nice clean start from the front few rows again. Looks like there's a bit of moving there from looks like it was Steve Arnell trying to get across on Matt Shepard off the line into Adler for the first time, and this time in the whole shot does go to McMaster as they turn up to a left-hander towards the complex with Campbell, Cobb and Seagrave. Now, Murphy might try and attack early doors here, but under threat now from both Jaroslav Cherney and Christian Zaruta. Cherney's trying to take a little peek around the outside into Campbell. Can't get it done through Cobb. He has to slot back into line. As for David Rowe, he has moved up a couple of spots. He's up 3 spots already for where he started into 12th, so that's a good start from the 8th row of the grid. Now, and here's the crucial part in the first couple of laps. If everyone can start to group together here and start to attack, and it's what's interesting is that McMaster is already trying to put himself out, and he has got himself out by more than half a second, which has put himself out of that slipstream range. Is up the inside into the right-hander at Goodwood with a bold pass early doors. Goes Christian Zaruta into 3rd. It politely elbows Jaroslav Cherney out of the way. Now they come up towards out of the kink of Village and towards Church now for the first time. Great aerial shot as they come through the right-hander, and it is 5 for the lead as they come out of the fastest corner in the UK, with Paul Fernhoff now making a cracking start. He's now in that lead contention. Up the hill, through the Brooklands kink. And look at this, it's 3-4 abreast. with David Rowe, bless him, in the mix. He's on the inside of everyone down towards the complex, getting a bit of a shove from somebody behind. I think that's Tom Willis is getting a shove from behind into the complex. He started the lap in 15th. He's going to end it about 8th or so. Oops, 2 cars off in the background. That's Tom Willis and James Wingfield. They've both come together. I figured it was going to end in tears for somebody at least into that complex. They've won that close together, and it has for Tom and for James, sadly. Chris Skillicorn's also dropped a couple of spots, as has Paul Hawker. They're in their own little battle, I think, for 17th and 18th place towards the back. So McMaster leads the way. Murphy in second place, from Shirley, then Saruta and Ferniha. And then we talked about him, Chris. David Rowe from 15th on the grid, already up to 8th in the first lap, making moves.
Yeah, he got himself in exactly the right position. That pack of cars, they were side by side like that from about corner 3 all the way through down past Church. But he managed to manoeuvre his car up the inside of the chicane and managed to hold it all together, which behind him, as you saw, Wingfield and Willis just came together and it just clipped them and moved them off into the barriers.
Once, touch wood, a bit of good luck for David Rowe the first couple of laps. He never gets it the first couple of laps in the race. This time, the luck has certainly come up for him, so fingers crossed he can keep that going for the rest of the race. So, coming towards the end of lap 2 now, McMaster will still lead the pack out of Church Corner. Murphy's going with him still. It's still a gap of just over half a second. He's going to try and reduce that as much as he can. He's edging ever closer in the toe as he comes up towards through the Brooklands kink, up the hill towards Club. He's close, but he's agonising out about half a second range in the toe as he comes back into the Club chicane for the second time. Zaruta's keeping watch as they flick right, left and right again through the Club chicane. And now over the start and finish line to end lap number 2. And Marcy's pretty good on corner exit because he finds quite a bit of time on corner exit and pulls at least a couple of tenths on the exit there from it was half a second going into the Club chicane to now 7 tenths going out of it. So finding quite a lot of time on corner exit for the most part as he turns into Campbell Cobb and Seagrove again. Here's David Rowe, not finished with his adventures up the field as we go back and forth with the DPR team boss, and he's trying to make a move on one of his fellow DPR drivers, Matt Shepherd. Looks through Campbell, then through Cobb on the left hand side and Seagrove. He's setting him up for a move, possibly for 7th place. He is inside half a second to possibly get the toe here around the back of the circuit. So I think while David's progress was pretty stellar on that first lap, he's hitting his first sort of, I don't wish to be impolite when I say this, his first roadblock in this race so far in Matt Shepherd, but he's certainly keeping close to try and make a move at least before the end of this lap.
Yeah, and I think there's every chance he will. I'm pretty sure Matt Shepherd will take that. Certainly that's how David Rowe will be viewing him, as a roadblock. It's blocking his progress to get back into this lead battle. We're seeing Saruta just dropping off there, but James Murphy positively is closer in this race at the moment than he was in the last race, and that's a good sign. But yeah, and then also Fernihoff actually clinging on and moving himself away from Arnell, where he's having that race-long battle before.
James have been knowing James, he'll have his foot to the floor, trying to just edge close to the back of Steve McMaster's car. But I think where Steve is pretty quick is through the chicane here. And look at that, from 5 tenths to 8 tenths out of that corner. Just finds a bit more time, but maybe on corner exit now you can see he's getting a bit quicker. Murphy quick on that last lap, sets the fastest lap of the race, the first proper flying lap. As they come up through Allard once again, so he's got the gaps to 7 tenths per second. He seems to be pretty quick, pretty good on some of the twisty sections and through the corners, but maybe on corner exit is where McMaster's a little bit better as he turns into Campbell, Cobb and Seagrove. And we always made it a bit of a running joke that James Murphy was the driver that was always a bit over enthusiastic, as David Rowe has managed to get around Matt Shepherd up to 7th place now. His next target is to make up 2 seconds with Steve Arnell, who's just ahead getting into P6. But it was always a bit of a running joke we made that James Murphy was always the overexcitable one, the one that made a mistake and ran off the road or was throwing the car around a lot. But he seems to have, in this second season, his esports driving seems to have matured quite a bit. He's obviously a very mature and very quick driver in real life, but his esports driving seems to have enhanced a bit more and seems to have got a bit more smoother, a bit more calmer, being able to pull in those results when he needs to. On this lap he has lost a bit of time though, middle. He's almost just outside of just a second behind McMaster at the moment, but in terms of him being a bit more careful in terms of his lines and the speed he takes through corners and the way he attacks them when he makes a move, etc., he seems to have kind of improved that a lot in the last few times since he started in the series back in season 1.
Yeah, definitely. He kind of exploded onto the scene, didn't he? He built his sim sort of after we'd started through the start of season 1 and then immediately came to the front of the race, but had a couple of spins. And like you say, he's just got a feel for his rig a bit more now. He's definitely more under control and knowing when it's worth in the sim world making their moves and when it's worth just sitting back and waiting. But at the moment, we're seeing McMaster giving us a masterclass. He's really pulling away. He's solidified that gap, and now very much Murphy is in the jaws of Cherney there.
Yeah, not even half distance yet, and the gap is up to 1.6 seconds. So McMaster wasting no time in being allowed to be. I think he's learned his lesson from race 1, where he allowed James Murphy to be too much in the vicinity to try and keep within range of attacking. He's now decided to put his foot down early doors and build that gap up already. And even in this part of the race, either James just doesn't seem to have the pace in this second race compared to the first one to keep up with him, or McMaster just found another level in terms of how quick he can go to move forwards. Speaking of moving forwards, David Rowe is now within a second now of Steve Arnell and getting closer corner by corner. You can see the gap was just over 2 seconds last time we saw him. It's now down to 3/4 of a second now, so he's found 1.25 seconds since we last saw him here, and he heads through Church Corner in 7th position, chasing after Steve Arnell with Paul Fernehoff a couple of seconds up the road, and that's not going to help David Rowe. Again, track limits, Dave, slap on the wrist, and he gets back on the road now into 7th position. He's kept a bit of momentum. In fact, ironically, I think it's even helped him, so I'm not quite sure that's allowed.
We'll
Chris,
forgive him this once, seeing as he has been wronged this evening so far. But yeah, he's closed that 2-second gap relatively quickly, so I'd feel pretty confident that he is going to be able to make the move shortly. In fact, Arnell, is that Arnell? Yeah, Arnell spun to the inside there, so he's gained a place automatically through that process.
And it looks as though that's already, in fact, he's on the back of Christian Zaruta. So whatever happened to Christian, he's fallen back a lot, which means that not only has Paul Fernehoff got through, but he's now under threat from David Rowe. This is a bit of a deja vu from the end of race 1 all over again. So we didn't quite catch what happened, truthfully, but whatever happened for both Steve Arnell and Christian Zaruta, it's all played in the hands of David Rowe here. He's now picked up only one more spot, but is right on the back of somebody else for another. So the top 5 finish for 15th on the grid may well very much be on the cards here. And it looks to me Cherney possibly is starting to try and keep up with Murphy here. He set a personal best on the last lap he just completed, and he is keeping Murphy within relative striking range, but again, like it was with McMaster and Murphy in the first couple of laps, he's outside that half a second range he needs to be in to be able to feel the proper effect of the toe. He's made a good run through Church Corner, and now on the climb up the hill through Brooklands towards Club, there might be an opportunity to close a bit more on the braking as they come back towards the start the pits and the end of another lap. We've gone past the halfway distance in this race, 6.5 minutes to go in this second caterhamracer.com 420R Championship race here at Thruxton. Of course, this is a lead up to the real world rounds coming up on August 22nd and 23rd, and David Rowe's getting a bit impatient here, thinking, right, I lost out on what was, I believe, was a 4th place in race 1. Now he wants it back for real, in fact, to get himself into 5th, but of course he's also going to try and get himself in the mix to catch up to Paul Fernehoff, but to do that he's got to dispose of Zaruta and then pull in another roughly 2.5 seconds to make that stick. Not
long left now. We've only got a third of the race left, and so yeah, he's got to make this move stick pretty quickly. But we know that Christian's not an easy pass by any stretch of the imagination, and Paul Fernehoff has done well there to sort of stretch that gap out. I imagine that both Arnell and Christian had not an issue together, but maybe an outbraking manoeuvre or outbrake themselves just in clear air. So that's probably through the club chicane. It was just after the club chicane we joined it, so I think that's probably what happened.
Unfortunately, James Wingfield, after his early mistake, has sadly retired from the race. He wasn't watching those battles in the last couple of laps. So James, unfortunately, not having the best of nights tonight, but hopefully we'll be back and have some better fortunes if he takes part in the Academy race, and of course then goes on to Thruxton for real. Will hopefully be in the mix in the 310R ranks on the real Thruxton. So we're on board with Steve Arnell, keeping on the coattails of David Rowe, and he is inside that half a second, so he's going to start to edge a little bit closer here. You say half a second because in the sim here, that half a second range is when you start to get a toe. If you're outside it, you almost pretty much following them as if you're both going at exactly the same speed. You don't get a benefit of anyone getting a toe here, and Zaruta getting very messy through the chicane you can see in front. That might be a prime opportunity for David Rowe to pounce here. He did possibly snatch a break himself heading into Club Corner, and now David Rowe, you can see, is swarming all over the rear end of Christian Zaruta through Allard Corner. We're on board with David Rowe now. We switch our onboard cameras, and Zaruta hesitating here as he comes up through Allard Corner, not really that confident on the amount of grip he's got at the moment. Rowe's to his outsides to come under brakes into Campbell, trying to get the switch back through Cobb, and he'll try and get on the inside again for Seagrave, and tries to dive up the inside. There's a bit more contact between them. I think Rowe's getting a bit impatient here through Seagrave. It's giving Arnell a chance to get back into the mix, as it is also for Matt Shepherd, who's not too far away. A little wide there for Arnell. He put a wheel onto the grass and kicks up a little bit of dust. David Rowe on maximum attack here with 4 minutes to go in this second race of the evening at Thruxton, and going for a move possibly up the inside for 5th place on Zaruta. And Zaruta, have to say, he's almost capitulating way too easy, or I speak too soon in fact, because Zaruta's going round the outside, and the two DPR cars are going to go wheel to wheel towards Church Corner. They're both going to be brave as Zaruta tries to go round the outside. I take my hat off to him, but he decides that he will not go on the outside line. He was thinking about it. Arnell goes right to the outside line as he runs too wide on the exit, but now into 5th position for the moment, Chris. But Zaruta, if you go back and forth with him, he's not finished just yet.
No, I wondered whether Zaruta was actually managing that situation. You see him go around the outside, but he's had problems breaking into the chicane for the last 2 laps. He's actually managed to bring it to a stop, but hasn't made that move stick. I wonder whether he was managing his apex speed there to try and back David up a little bit into Steve Arnell. We saw that working for a couple of corners, but we also saw Dave sort of, because of that, nudging Christian. Either that or he'd overcooked his tyres and was having a problem with that. But yeah, he's certainly looking feisty again now, but in that last one I would be surprised if he was managing the situation, but that has backfired given that Dave is now in front.
Though, because Zaruta is trying to fight back as much as he can. He heads through the complex of Campbell, back through Cobb again. Its position's reversed this time because it was Zaruta in front defending from Rowe. Now it's Rowe defending from Zaruta. Just behind them we saw Arnell and Shepherd going side to side, exiting Seagrave on towards the complex of Noble and Goddard. And now as they go nose to tail through this long left-hander for the even longer right-hander, you must have to sacrifice taking the ideal racing line of drifting out wide on the exit of Noble to get yourself set up for Goodwood. And that long run all the way towards the Kink of Church, and then Kink of Village, forgive me, and then towards that very fast right-hander at Church. And Zaruta is well within that half a second, looking to possibly make a move. He's tucked underneath the roll cage of David Rose. They come up through this long, fast right-hander. Here comes Zaruta pulling alongside. Now he is in optimum position. He will be on the inside if he stays where he is for the club chicane. Rowe might be brave to go around the outside if he's got enough momentum. Trying to get the side draft on the run towards the braking zone. Now can Zaruta get it stopped this time? He breaks a little bit deeper into the complex, locks a wheel. The answer is just about, and Rowe will try and get the undercut to switch back on him on the exit to get a better possible run towards Allard and then the complex. So Christian Zaruta, who said he was having problems breaking into that chicane the last couple of laps, seems to have nailed it this time, Chris, and he's back up into 5th. The question's got to be, with a minute and a half to go, for how much longer?
Yeah, we've probably onto the last lap. It's hard to know when the leader went across the line, given that he's got a nice gap there, but it's going to be tight for this second. I would consider this to be the last lap right now. He's ahead on the last lap, but is going ahead into Church the right thing to do, or do you actually want to be following like he was last lap?
I think we might get one more lap, in fact, actually, because I think the lap time of these guys is 125,
yep.
So I think Lee's must have crossed the line at about roughly 150 or so they're going to get one more lap after this one. The left-hander at Noble and back into Goodwood. These two still going back and forth, but they know they're going to be losing time to Bernhardt in front. Shout out to Paul there, because he hasn't really had too much to battle, but he is up there in 4th place in what I call no man's land. He's not catching the cars in front, but he's not being caught either, because everyone around them's in their own private battles, or at least not in a range to attack anyone. But this is the closest battle on track, it seems, and the second closest is right behind them, because we've got Arnell and Shepherd going tit for tat through Club, through the Church Corner up towards Club. So this great aero shot means we can kind of keep focus on both the battles at the same time. It looks as though we can see Arnell trying to defend from Shepherd as Rowe thinks about going down the outside. He's got a great run towards the Club chicane. They both hit the brakes together. Is Rowe going to go around the outside into Club? He goes one side then the other. Yes, he does. Great move from David Rowe there. Depends if he can hold on to it on the exit though, because if it's a good enough exit for Zaruta, he can get alongside, and not quite just yet. So a bold but daring and brilliant move from David Rowe to go head on to the last lap, back into 5th position. But Christian Zaruta is going to be under attack on there. But I think it's safe to say, Chris, even with your experience, you don't go around the outside into Club chicane very often, if not at all. So I have to say, I tip my hat to David Rowe. That was a brilliant pass.
Caterhams love passing anywhere, and especially the places you don't think it's possible. And David Rowe, definitely, that was a very well controlled move and difficult to do. You know that Christian's now wounded and will be very much looking for revenge. I fear we're going to have to cut away before we see the conclusion of this to see Steve cross the line. But nevertheless, Christian is now potentially in the better spot. Certainly statistics would probably say following into the Church area on this last lap is the better place to be.
Yeah, these two battles we're seeing here for 5th and 7th have been the two most entertaining at the moment. Of course, because the top 4 are pretty spread out in front of them, so this is the main entertainment for that last top 5 place. The crucial for points for Zaruta. He came into the weekend with the inside the top 5 in about 4th place in points. As David Rowe runs wide on the exit, that might not help him on the run towards the chicane. We're going to have to cut away for a second because Steve McMaster does indeed quite easily make it 2 out of 2 tonight, and 4 in the season for him as he crossed the line to maintain his championship lead. Murphy is second, Journey third in their side by side to Club Chicane, but David Rowe will just hold on. I think unless Ruth can bump him out of the way. Oh, contact, that was rather rude. Oh dear, Christian Zaruta will come across the line and he will take 5th position, but I think even he will admit that's not the way he wants to take it. Across the line he goes. 6th for Arnell, 7th for Shepherd, 8th for David Rowe. Oh, it was all going so well until the last corner, Chris.
Yeah, I think we might see some callback for that one, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, you could see that Rowe had the position on the outside, and there was definitely some front to rear contact there. And we've seen some more contact at the rear of this field just for the last lap. So everyone's saving it for the last lap to decide they didn't want to cross the line. So yeah, everything. I'm not sure what you say about that, Scott.
No, just for the record, for the cars that were crossing the line behind David Rowe, 9th was Blair McConaughey out of all of that. Then Tim Van He was 10th. 11th place, I think, was Tom Willis, and we'll go to the rest of the field in a second. So, result for race 2 then, a rather bizarre finish to race 2, but nonetheless, it's Steve McMaster, relatively unchallenged once again in race 2, 4th win of the season, maintains his championship lead. James Murphy in 2nd place, 2.7 seconds back this time, couldn't quite stay with him on this occasion. Joseph Cherney keeps up a consistent night, 2 third places for him. Paul Vernehoff, shout out for him in race 2, possibly one of the drivers of the race, 4th place and a legitimate pace as well, so good stuff for him. Then we get to the tenuous bit. Christian Zaruta 5th, but there'll definitely be some conversations after that. 6th for Steve Arnell, 7th for Matt Shepherd, 8th for David Rowe, who I think many probably will feel, including even maybe Christian himself, should have been in 5th, but we'll let the stewards decide on that one. 9th for Blair McConaughey, and 10th for Tim Van He to round out the top 10. 11th for Tom Willis, 12th for Tom McEwing, and then it's Paul Hawke who managed to finish this time. Mark Rodman gets 14th, and Chris Skillicorn from Andrew Parker, and then Emma Jeselnik was the last car across the line just behind Andrew, and the only car we lost was James Wingfield, who did not finish. So, I think plenty of talking points, particularly at the end of that race, Chris, from that battle for 5th position particularly, but for the main part, Steve McMaster was just been the class of the field tonight. James Murphy was arguably his nearest competitor, but I think once Steve got out in front and had the groove, as he had done before at the opening rounds, there was simply no stopping him.
Absolute dominance tonight. Again, normally when we haven't seen people on the stream very much, that's because they've done such a good job of dominating. And again, tonight he's been that person. So congratulations to Steve. Like I say, the talking point's all about that last lap on the second race, and what a good job David had done to get all the way back up from 14th on the grid or 15th on the grid. Should say Tom Willis as well. We saw him have that incident with James Wingfield on that early lap, but he got himself back into 11th place, and that's no mean feat as well. So some really good performances, and as you called out, Paul Vernehoff sitting in 4th, making a little bit of hay while other people had some issues around him, but say consistency all the way through gave him a nice consistent result and a great one for his championship.
Yeah, good nice result for those contending in the championship. Chris, think it's time for you to do your usual Martin Brundle impression. Go and trundle up the virtual pit lane, see what you can find in terms of any conversations from drivers who are willing to talk. I anticipate that you might possibly turn up with one of the 2 drivers in the aforementioned incident, maybe, if they are willing to talk. But I shall let you wander off with your virtual microphone and see who you can find. So off you go. Let's and good luck whoever you find.
Now, this could be the most silly thing to have done in the world, but I have brought both David and Christian into the commentary box. Hopefully they've both got audio and speaking. Christian has left the commentary box, so I'm assuming he doesn't want to be involved in this. David.
No, I was about to say brace yourselves, but I think Christian has decided that it might be an idea to jump out at this point.
He certainly has, David. On. So, yeah, what do you say about that? We were just about to congratulate you on such a brilliant comeback race when you had an unfortunate server glitch, it seems. But you know, it wasn't to be, and that last lap was a little bit tasty. Oh, maybe we've lost David. David, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
I was about to say the silence says it all, but he just had his microphone on mute. So.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, it was a great race with Christian. You know what he's like, Chris. He's a wily old fox, isn't he? No, it's great. Unfortunately, I can't really remember quite what happened, but unfortunately, I just run into the cut penalty on the left of the chicane. So I was actually serving my slowdown when Christian.
Okay.
So kind of tap me up the back. That's the issue.
So you'd been a naughty boy, and the server was asking to slow down before the line. Yes, okay. That that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, so Christian legged it from the commentary box, so either he hasn't got voice or doesn't want to talk it through. But overall, how do you think tonight went? And is there any reason for why it classed you as 15th rather than 4th or whatever it was when you in for race 1?
I mean, race 1. No, again, I got another cut penalty. So basically, I went too deep, and then it disqualified me as I went over the line. But it was good fun anyway. I had a good kind of second race start.
Yeah, you got the seas parted. So okay, so actually I don't feel as bad now, given you've been a naughty boy. So that it was just Thurber doing the right thing. But congratulations tonight on some great racing on stream. So we'll look forward to more of the same next week.
Thanks, Chris. Great stuff.
Okay, and I think let's also. I think it's only fair to bring in Steve McMaster, isn't it? After he's had his holiday. So I think, Steve had a little holiday and he's been back on the server for the 420s. And what a way to come back, Steve.
Yeah, no, well, it was a great holiday, but I really wanted to try and win both races here to make up for the two at Cadwell. I was a bit disappointed with the Cadwell result. I mean, Yaroslav did a great job there, but to come back and win both is just fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, and in what a style as well. I mean, the pressure was coming on in that race 1 from James, sort of maybe halfway through the race, but you saw him off, and it didn't quite materialise at the end. We were really hoping that it was going to be a great finish, but I'm sure from your point of view, it was the right result.
100%. I could see him putting the laps in, and I heard him get a fastest lap. I was like, oh no, James, come on, don't do this. I'm comfortable here. But I just managed to keep consistent. The consistency was the key thing. Just keeping the delta at 0.1, 0.2 off of my quickest lap was the really important part.
Yeah. So, congratulations. I guess that's all. Scott, have you got any questions for Steve?
Just the fact that the pace is really consistent tonight. Were you worried at any point about the pace that James was setting, or do you think once you managed to get out of that half a second range that you were pretty much safe, or do you think he was able to come back at any point? Do you think in those closing stages?
James was quick, and he's a canny old. So he's the kind of guy that you just know if you let off or if you make one mistake. I made a mistake and lost 0.3 into the chicane halfway through race 1, and he was right back onto me. And I just know that if you make any more mistakes, he's going to be all over you and past. So it's just about super consistency, not making mistakes. Otherwise, he's just going to be past and win it.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve, and we'll see you at the next one.
Cheers, chaps. Thanks for everything. Take care.
Yeah, good stuff, Steve.
Excellent. Well, that kind of pretty much wraps up the racing action for tonight once again. More entertaining stuff from the caterhamracer.com races, as we always expect, and it's plenty of great racing, great overtaking, controversial moments and everything. Typical leaving a caterham.com racing, I think, in many cases. I think sure Chris would agree. So let's quickly take a look ahead, if I can get my words out. Look ahead to what's coming up. So the next caterhamracer.com action is going to be, of course, next week, because the schedule is we run 420 hours 2 weeks before the next real-life Caterham race, and then we run the Academy race on the week of the actual next race. So this time next week, the Academy Championship, August the 18th, once again at 8:30 at Thruxton. As for the 420 hours, we won't see them for quite a while now, because for at least over a month, because their next 18 is going to be at their next venue, which is going to be Brands Hatch, of course. That's the weekend taking place in real life, or set to, on the 26th and 27th of September. So 2 weeks prior to that is going to be the race for the 420 hours, and of course the Academy cars will be the next week after that, on the week of the meeting. So, before we wrap up, I think some final thoughts on Chris. 2 more wins for McMaster, making up for what he said was a less than satisfactory weekend at Cadwell, even though he still got 2 decent second places. He still leads the championship, exiting Thruxton tonight. I guess, really, he's the man that's in form, and even though the likes of Jaroslav Cherny have been able to beat him at least once at Cadwell, on the faster circuits, he seems to be the man that everyone has to try and catch.
I say it. Very different tracks lead to different people being at the front, but we do see those consistent drivers who are there or thereabouts. We often say that the Academy driving, racing brings even closer than the 420R, and what we saw tonight was some epic stuff from the 420s. So I'm really looking forward to next week and seeing what the Academy cars can bring and who's going to shine on those.
Final point, of course, the next circuit coming up is Brands Hatch, another different circuit. It's relatively fast, but it's quite short as well. Usually brings up great racing, so it's not as quick as somewhere like Thruxton here, but it's not as winding as somewhere like Thruxton or Cadwell. So Another unique challenge for these cars to have to tackle, which they have done once before in Season 1, but now there's a championship at stake, it could get even more
Brands
tasty.
Hatch often in real life is very, very tasty racing. It's actually quite simple to defend around Brands Hatch. So again, you just regularly see the piles and piles of Caterhams all diving in. And as I said, Caterhams are never shy of shoving their nose in left, right and centre where you wouldn't expect them to. So yeah, that's looking forward to that.
Just before we leave then, a quick note, of course, to our 3 sponsors of the caterhamracer.com 420R Championship, which is sponsored by Just Add Lightness, high-performance LED lights for the Caterham 7. Head to their website at justaddlightness.co.uk. To design and display structures, immerse yourself in worlds beyond with bespoke projection screens. And to Avon Tyres, the official tyre supplier of Caterham Motorsport, on road, on track, on Avons. From myself, Scott Woodwiss, and Chris Hutchinson, and all of us here at caterhamracer.com, thank you once again for tuning in if you're watching live or watching back on the broadcast. And be sure to tune in next week, same time, for the Academy cars to take their turn. Most of the same names competing in that. And is anyone going to topple Jaroslav Cherny this time? Can Steve McMaster use some of that pace in the 420Rs to his advantage and possibly take a clean sweep in both championships? We'll find out next week, but until then, have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye.